I've had a couple of near-death experiences, and I like to put it into context. And the one that you're particularly talking about, the very intense one, happened when I was in my 30s. But as a child, I came from a very dysfunctional home, and my mom was an alcoholic. My dad also was absent, and so I had to become an adult very, very young. One of the most poignant experiences of a child that relates into the future, which I'll just briefly go over just to give you some context, is one morning when my mom was recovering from one of her drinking binges, and she would wake up not in a very good mood, go figure. So she came, roaring down the hall, and it was always kind of scary because you never knew of the children, the three siblings, who was going to be in trouble. But this particular morning, it was me. Because I hadn't done something I had been told to do. So it was like 6 in the morning. I was in my bed. I was afraid, and I heard my mom roaring through the door, and she grabbed me by the hair, pulled me through the kitchen, and then pointed up at this spot on the ceiling, which was a grease spot that I was supposed to have cleaned up. But with taking care of my little sister and going to school and just trying to manage my life, I had not had time to complete all my little girl chores. So, but rather than argue with a drunk person, which is never a good idea, by the way, or somebody who has a very serious hangover, I just got up and started cleaning. And this was a really important day in my life because I feel like this is when everything changed, because I was very young and innocent, but I was already, I feel like I'm probably an old soul, as I think you are. Because I was a deep thinker at a very young age. And I remember hearing the stories of God, Jesus, the Christian philosophy of life. And I never really, in our household, I always make the jokes that God wasn't welcome unless he was damned. So it wasn't a Christian indoctrination. But of course, being in the Western world, you hear about the Christian philosophy of heaven and hell. And I was up on this counter cleaning this dark spot of grease, and I was having this private conversation with God. And I remember thinking, if you're good to get to heaven, then you're truly not good, because that's kind of corrupt. You're being good to get something. You're not truly good. And if you're good to avoid hell, then you're also, not moving from a place of purity. And I remember thinking, wow, I just want to be good because I'm a good person. And literally that was like a moment of, my first moment of like personal self-worth as a little girl. And I remember thinking, that means I am a good person. And it was a really profound awakening for me. I remember just kind of this feeling of joy that went over me as I realized, wow, just to be good for the goodness sake is what true goodness is. And then I started this conversation with God, and I remember thinking, well, God, if you are real, and you can part the waters for Moses or do all the other miraculous things that you hear about, then I would like one simple miracle. And that miracle was, I'd like to know that you are real before I die and not after. Because knowing after seemed a little bit like cheating, like, why can't I know before? And by the way, if you could help my mom stop drinking, which seemed all the more miraculous, by the way, then I would truly believe in God. And with that, Sabrina, I turned around, kind of in a daze, almost in a meditative state, and walked off this counter. And when you walk off a counter, the physics of it is that your head goes flying towards the floor. And in this moment, there was 3 of me. There was the physical body that was falling through time and space towards the floor. There was the soul entity that lived within my body, which I identified with. And there was this all-knowing observer that was also me, that was more encompassing. And I related with the soul entity that lived within my body. And I remember watching myself as though I were a spectator from a distance, falling through this tornado. And I was falling in the middle, and I was in a fetal position. I ended up coming into a serene night that was speckled with light or stars. And there was this loving presence, and I was told there's no empty space in the universe. And that radiant energy, those are stars, and that's what you are. And with that, I was back in my body, standing on my feet like a cat. So I fell from this counter, which is probably a 5-foot counter, and, head first, and somehow landed on my feet. And, because this is such an unusual experience and I had no context for it, I remember thinking, well, I must have fallen and hit my head and seen stars, had this really cool dream. You want to rationalize it. So I ran to the bathroom and I was looking for a bruise or, something, and there was nothing. And so I was like overwhelmed, like, this is miraculous. So I called my brother and I was like, Mark, God saved me. And he was like, what? And he, and I said, no, I fell off this counter and there was 3 of me. There was my body, there was this soul that lives inside my body, and there was this all-knowing observer, which, by the way, I had different words at that time because I was a little girl. And he was like, I think you've lost your mind. He literally said, I think you need a straitjacket. And we both started laughing because it was, I was like, oh, it made sense to me. He didn't understand it. And it's really funny now because he's now a minister, my brother, and he's been my silent witness throughout the years, because I told him, I said, I get it that it sounds so miraculous. It's hard to believe it happened, even for me. But never forget, I don't want to think this was a dream, because I knew for sure that it happened. So he said, all right, I'll remember that you need a straitjacket, and throughout the years, he's been my witness. So fast forward, my life, I make it through my childhood. I leave home really early. I married the love of my life, who had 2 children with him. The marriage didn't work. I ended up living with my 2 small children, single mom, in Dallas, where I'm currently living, and feeling quite a bit like a failure. Like secretly nobody knew. On the outer, everyone always, because I was a model and I was successful and this and that, everybody had always thought of me as like a really successful. Nobody knew of my humble beginnings or the pain and suffering that I went through as a child, and how I had to pull myself up. I put myself through college. I worked, I worked through, I made straight A's. I remember my mom saying, when I left home at 17, she was like, well, if you don't come back, you never existed. You're going to be a whore, a prostitute, drug addict. And it made me so mad. I was like, not only did it crush me, because all I wanted was her to say, I love you. That's all I really wanted. But it crushed me because, a little girl, when you have a dysfunctional family, you always feel like it's your fault, What I want to say to some of your viewers who are listening to me right now is that it's not your fault. You didn't cause it, and you can't cure it. And if it's in your presence, it's probably a good lesson for your soul, but it's not your fault. And you don't need to contribute to that energy. So, and I learned that later in life. And I had to go through all the sorrow of that. And by the way, I did make amends with my mom before she passed, which I'm really happy about. I do believe she was the perfect mother for me, because she made me into this powerful woman by challenging me into change, and I realized that I had a choice to not be a victim, and we all have that choice. And that was one decision I made very early on in my life, thanks to my mother telling me I was going to be such a failure. I was like, oh, no. And that was the best pep talk I could have ever gotten, although it was very painful. So fast forward, I'm living my life in Dallas with my 2 children. I have this failed marriage, and really heartbreaking, because I felt like it was like secretly like Cinderella's, the slipper didn't fit, like the mask had been pulled away. Like even my husband saw that I wasn't worthy and not good enough, and and it really wasn't that at all. We were just, I needed a hero and he needed to save somebody, but we didn't have anything else in common. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work when you don't have a lot in common. So I remember I didn't date for about 1.5 years, because I really just didn't want to bring anyone into the house with the children. But I was living quite the hermit life. Like I didn't really go out much except to the gym or take the kids to school. I didn't have any friends. I didn't really know anybody. And so I thought I really should. It's not healthy for me to live this way. It's not healthy for my children to have their mom so isolated. So I decided that I would, try to make friends and open up my energy again. And in the universe, it's hilarious, like the way things work out. So this gentleman invited me on a trip, which I wasn't ready to be in relationship with anyone. I said, oh, no, I'm not ready. He said, no, you can bring a chaperone. You can come. There's an extra room. My kids are going to be there. Let's go skiing. And I thought, well, I really should I need to do something. So I invited my cousin, Carmen, to go with me, my chaperone at 35. And Carmen, by the way, she looked much like you. She was this beautiful woman with this doughy skin and big eyes and, long, lush hair. And she was just gorgeous. And so Carmen and I went on this trip. When we got there, I really wasn't ready for this. And they drank too much. They smoked, and they were using language that wasn't common in my world. And they were very nice people, but it was not having a good time, nor was Carmen. Carmen was she was a clarinetist for the Dallas Opera, a very sophisticated girl. And we were like, so I told my friend, I was like, hey, I think I want to go back sooner. I don't really want to stay here 3 more days or whatever. He's like, yeah, that's a good idea. So, and the funny part of it is that on the way to the airport, which I guess is not funny, but we had this horrible car wreck. So I'm heading back to Dallas, I thought, but actually I was heading towards this horrible or very traumatic experience, at least. We were going up a mountain, and the guy that was driving the car, it was a small red Jeep, lost control of the car, and we started to spin icy roads. And we ended up sideways on this 2-lane highway, and a car coming down the mountain, because it was icy, had lost control and couldn't stop and hit my side of the car, which threw us into a tailspin. We were just going like this, and we flew off this cliff, which was an 80-foot fall. Basically, in total, we fell 25 feet, flipped 10 times to end up at 80 feet at the bottom of this cliff, which is incredible that I'm even alive or anyone survived. It was a very traumatic accident, but at the time it was happening, I was outside my body. I always say that I'm very loosely tethered. I found myself in this radiant space above the car wreck where I was watching the whole scene, and almost very dispassionately. I was watching as though you were just watching a commercial on TV or something, just watching myself scream and the car flip and the other people doing what they're doing inside the car. And I'm in this radiant presence and this all-embracing love permeating every cell of my body, and I'm feeling completely held and cradled and loved. And I'm having this simultaneously, as I'm falling off this cliff, time slows down, and I'm shown many, many things about my own life, a panoramic, 3-dimensional view of every instant of my life instantaneously, which is hard to explain. And not only that, but the ripple effect of every word, kind, unkind, every action, kind, unkind, and how it affected everyone. In small and large waves. There's this idea about the butterfly effect where a butterfly flaps its wings can create a tsunami. And from my perspective in this out-of-body space, and what I was shown is that our smallest inclinations, the smallest shift of the compass, changes everything. I was shown that, things that I thought were so important, accomplishments, accumulation, reaching certain goals, were not really the important things. I was shown that these random acts of kindness where I had actually gone and helped someone, given somebody money, on the street corner, or sat with someone who needed a hug, or just a random act of kindness. And I was shown how it's so overwhelming to even talk about it. Like, just how you can't imagine how being kind can save someone's life. I was shown this one woman. And it was so strange because I don't even know her. She was just this lady sitting on a bench. And I remember I was just drawn towards her. So I went and I talked to this lady, and I think I gave her some money. And anyway, I never saw her again. And she just went on her way. But I was shown this woman and how she was going to kill herself. and how just one kind word had saved her. And I just wish people would know that, especially, in our society where people are so lonely. It's in the Western world, people are so isolated, and family is no longer, like we used to have a tribe, and now everybody's so separate. And so I was shown this beautiful experience. I mean, it was so touching to me because I had no idea that that was like one of the most important things I've done in my life. You think these big acclamations of fame and fortune matter, but they really don't. And so that experience was really poignant. And I was also shown, acts where I was unkind and where I had said something of neglectful manner or unconsciously hurt somebody, and the ripple of that and the remorse of that. And it was interesting though, because there wasn't really any judgment brought upon me at all. Like, it wasn't like I was being shown this and said you're either good or a bad person. It really wasn't like that at all. It was just shown the truth of your actions, basically, and the ripple effect of that and the consequences of that. But there was no judgment. There was just compassion and love, even in the acts of, when you have done something that was unkind. But there was always just the opportunity of reflection and to choose again. But I think more importantly, it was being shown that how the simple shift of the compass can change universes. Like, you have no idea how powerful you are. When you have this opportunity to say an unkind word, but you choose to do the opposite of that, how it changes universes and could literally save someone's life. And I think if all of us, like, one of the things I was shown is like, if each one of us in our own way was just a little kinder, not only to others, but to ourselves, like this self-talk that we have, it would just make the world a better place. And it would certainly change our world because, there is this book that or this Auschwitz, this concentration camp survivor, this quote that I heard that forever changed my life, because they were saying, to this survivor of this most humiliating thing that you could possibly imagine going through, which you're raped and pillaged and your future has been ripped away and your family has been killed and you're being starved and forced into labor. And so they asked this man, like, how, and it's a very famous quote, like, how did you make it through that? And he said, basically, he said, and it's a paraphrase, but, through the bars, the prison bars, you can see the mud or you can see the stars. And in a sense, that's true for all of us. Like, we get to choose what we get to focus on, and what you focus on, is what your world will be. It could be, everything's available. The mud is there, for sure, it's there. It can be a very unkind and cruel world. But there's also stars, and there's radiance and beauty within and around us. And so, continuing on in my near-death experience, so I'm outside my body watching this incredible scene unfold before me, a horrific scene that looks like something out of a movie. This car being smashed and flying off a cliff and tumbling, and meanwhile I'm having this profound conversation, watching my life, and I shared one of the most poignant events, and then continue on, I'm shown three very poignant things, which, based on my childhood, I had always wanted to be good. I always wanted to do good, but there wasn't a lot of joy in my life up to that point. And I think this is a really sad thing, because one of the first things that this radiant energy or being presence told me is that each soul is here for the bliss of its own experience, its own existence. This was the exact words I was told me. Each soul is here for the bliss of its own existence. And then it said, and it looked directly at me and said, and that means you, Chrystal. And I was like shocked, I was like, what? I'm here for bliss? I thought I was here to be good, to be a good mother, to be a good wife, a good ex-wife, a good friend, a good this, a good that. But there was no joy. And he said, no, you're here for bliss. And right in the middle of chaos, there's bliss in that. And another story that really, I think, illustrates this is when I was in college, I read about a man in the 13th century who lost one of his daughters to an illness or something. And he wrote this poem about her. And And the poem basically goes like this, and I think this is probably relevant for others who have lost loved ones. He said, every morning I wake up with this deep hole or this deep longing, this deep empty space of this person who's no longer in my life. And he said, but that's not the biggest fear. The biggest fear is that I will wake up and not feel that loss. Like someday it would be okay that she was gone. And so I think this is like the interesting idea of pain and suffering, is that there is a great joy to loving so deeply, And I remember, this is obviously not the same, but I had a little dog named Skylar, who was like a puppy of mine, and we were so connected with Skylar. And when Skylar passed away, it was one of the first like really tragic losses that I had, because animals are such great soulmates. And I had that same feeling of like, oh my gosh, I don't want to wake up and it's okay that Skylar's gone, which eventually, by the way, I woke up and it was okay that Skylar was gone, which was, I guess, the healing of it. But just to know that you can love so deeply that that kind of loss becomes part of your joy. So I think that, the way that people look at the world of black and white is not really true. Like, it's a lot of gray areas. Like, there is great joy in this profound sense of loss and the gift of a loss, of the truth of our eternal existence and the things that it teaches us when we lose. And the cycle, like, for example, with those who've lost pets, I know how important that is. Like, pets teach us, and I have 2 aging dogs right now. They teach us the cycle of life, and they teach us unconditional love. I always love dogs because if you spell it backwards, it's God, They teach us unconditional love, and it's so beautiful. And their lifespan is so short that we get to see our own aging, and how we move from puppy to middle age to old, and they mirror it so perfectly for us. And then we learn to have compassion for them and for ourselves, the aging process, and how we will lose everything in this life, including our body. So don't get too attached. But the love is what keeps us connected forever. So this is, a lot of different lessons that I'm being shown, and I was shown 3 very poignant things, and I always like to mention these because it was directly shown to me by this radiant being. And he said, there's 3 things that you really never have experienced in your life. And the first one he showed me was like the rising of the morning sun and the setting of the sun. And of course I have seen that many times, but I had never really seen it or experienced the metaphoric value of the coming of a day and the gift of a human life, of every breath that we can never have again. The metaphoric message was for me that I had never really appreciated my life. Like, I had just kind of moved through it on this, upward, onward mission and busyness, so busy with our shopping list and, all the errands, that I hadn't really seen the beauty of what it means to be a human and to be alive and to live in this world of choice and change and contrast. And I was shown that through this metaphor of the sun rising and then the restfulness of the sun setting, and how the cycles of life are mirrored in that. And then secondly, I was shown, again, a very earthy thing. I was shown that I had never really experienced the smell of freshly cut grass, like when someone's mowing their lawn, which I think is hilarious that I was shown that, but it was like this earthiness, like the gift of being on planet Earth. And we do have this amazing planet with beautiful deep oceans and valleys and mountains and deserts and and nature all around us. That I've always have flowers around because I'm so connected with nature. In particular, I love white roses. I just love white roses. But I was shown this freshly cut grass, and I had this like visceral experience of the smell. And I think I was shown that because we all know that smell, and that connects us to the earthiness of our planet and this wonderful gift that we have. And then thirdly, I was shown that I had never really reached out and touched anyone, like physically embraced, which of course I had 2 children and, 35 years old, I had obviously touched someone. I combed my children's hair and all of the things that we do with our physical bodies. But I was shown that I had never really brought the gift of that, in a soul state, we don't have the physical being that we have here, which is the flesh and bone, and the gift of being able to reach out and just connect with another, like physically. And I'm not even talking just intimately, I'm saying like, you know, embracing a friend and holding hands of a child, and, you know, just, you know, so many people go through life with not ever, especially in some of our different cultures where it's not okay to touch. And you know, there are lots of studies during the wars where babies were taken away from their mothers and put in these camps with nurses, but there was very little physical contact. The babies were dying because we need physical touch. And one of the things that we get to do here on planet Earth is to embrace each other, to have this tactile experience of our animals, our friends, our loved ones, our children, our parents. And so I was shown I had never really at least valued or brought conscious awareness to the gift of being in a physical embodiment and having this physical beingness and the ability to reach out and touch. So I always, you know, if you meet me, you'll always end up getting a hug from me. I tend to hug strangers, which is just because I'm so grateful to be able to do that. So this is all happening in the span of basically, you know, 30, 40 seconds, but time has completely stopped. I'm shown that there is no such thing of time, that time is stacked upon itself in the eternal now. And one of the examples I like to give when I talk about this is that if you try to get into the future, like if I were to ask you, step into the future, well, you could never do it, because no matter what, you'll always be stepping right into the present moment, which is now. And so you can't ever actually reach the future. And if I asked you to step into the past, well, of course, you could reach back with your memories, but you can never actually go back that way. So we are always in the eternal now. And I was shown this in that moment, like the eternity, the eternal now, and how all possible timelines, and this is something that we talked about at the beginning of this, all possible timelines for my existence and for all existence have already come into completion in the eternal now. And the energetic experience of what's happening is what I'm focusing on. You know, like we talked about, look out the prison bars, see the mud or see the stars. So what I'm currently energetically or magnetizing to my life is what would most serve my soul and what I'm focusing on. Because there's many different possible destinies. And I was shown in this out-of-body experience by this radiant presence, many timelines. And so there's this current timeline that I'm on. And then there were some that were lower, like let's say on the energetic spell of like lower possibilities for my life, like a less radiant version of Chrystal. And there was also these positive, more radiant versions of myself. And again, no judgment on either one. It wasn't like the universe said, oh, if you go on this side to the positive side, you're more enlightened. It wasn't like that at all. I mean, if going to the, let's say, to what people might consult the darker side of the spectrum would serve my soul better, then that was actually the most radiant path. So again, the gray area of like, you know, letting go of judgment, because we don't really, whatever is happening is what's supposed to be happening within the realm of our current consciousness. And so I was shown that I had these possibilities. I could come back and be disabled. I could actually leave the planet. I could die. Or I could come back and write a book and tell the world that love is all that matters. And that was like the timeline that really excited my soul. I was like, oh, like I remember just being so almost like childlike, like, oh, that's so exciting. Like, I want to write a book. I want to tell the world that love is all that matters. I had no idea how I was going to do that because, you know, again, in the context of my childhood and my failed marriage, and I felt like a failure, I was like, how am me, the unworthy one, the one, how am I supposed to tell the world, you know, that love is the unlovable one, that love is all that matters. And so, but I knew that that was my most joyous path, and then this presence says, you know, was kind of celebrating this particular path with me, and I say he, but it was an androgynous being. Then this presence said, and tell in this book, include in your book that sound and light are the future of medicine. And I was like, okay, I was so excited to just put this in my book, and so. You know, suddenly I am tumbling and I'm back in my body. I find myself at the bottom of this cliff. in an upside down Jeep that had just slammed into a wall of ice. And I come back to consciousness, and the guy who was driving the car is like semi-conscious, full of blood. My cousin is, I mean, this is a horrific car wreck, is, you know, nowhere to be found. And I'm just shocked, truthfully, that I'm alive, because I remember the last thought I had after being shown all these timelines is like, well, it's too late for me, because, I mean, you don't go off this cliff and tumble like what's happening to those people and survive. And so my last thought was, I'm going back into the light. That's what I believed that was going to happen. I thought I was going to die. And I was like, oh, I'm going back into the light. I said, oh, well, it's too late for me. Like, I was shown all this beauty, like all these reasons that you should live, and the beauty of my life, and the gifts of being human, and all of these things that I was shown, and how the smallest shift in the compass changes universes, and how we have opportunity to love and to experience. And then, but I also thought, well, it's too late for me, because it's like, you know, I'm basically dying here. And so I was shocked when I woke up, and I was like, it was dark, and there was this snow and lights and wheels, and like upside down wheels. And I remember I was like, oh my God, I'm alive. Like, I was so excited to be alive and to see my children again. And so I climbed out of this car. I called out to Carmen, who could not be found. And then I literally climbed up this cliff. I'm a girly girl, but I'm strong. I climbed up the cliff, and it was cold, and I got to the top, and there was a big line of cars, and everybody was shocked, and they were like, do you know what happened down there? Nobody could believe that I had actually climbed up this cliff. And I said, yes, there's 2 more people. And then they, you know, and then it got very interesting for me, because I had, I don't know if you've ever seen this movie called The Dead Zone, but it's a story about a guy who had a near-death experience, and after the near-death experience, he became very psychic, almost like an open channel. And that's exactly what happened to me. Like, anybody would touch me, I would immediately know all of their deepest fears and greatest sorrows and most joyous experiences, and it was really overwhelming. I suddenly knew that somebody was going to steal my purse, and I was really freaking out, because I had my tickets, for my plane tickets, and my wallet, and I kept trying to get someone to go down, and I saw this, I just saw a man with black boots stealing my purse, which actually did happen. And they took me they couldn't find my purse. They put me in an ambulance. They found Carmen and put her on a stretcher and air flighted her to the hospital. And I think, you know, because it's kind of a blur, I'm pretty sure I was just put in an ambulance and taken to the hospital. But when I got there, the experience was really crazy, because I was at this open door state, this kind of dead zone, where I was an open channel. And I remember the nurse that was interviewing me was saying, were you drinking, you know, accusing me, and I don't even drink, obviously, you know, based on my childhood. I never have been a drinker or never did drugs, none of that. And I was like, no, we were not drinking. I mean, the guy driving had like a glass of wine, but he was certainly not drunk. And I said, no, we were not drinking. And then he said, well, your cousin is going to die. I mean, this is like awful, right, that he said this to me. And I saw them, you know, had her in a room across the way, because a girl who came in with half the injuries is going to die. And if you were drinking, like, you guys are manslaughter, you're going to jail. And I was like, what? And I kind of pushed my way through, and I went into the room where they had Carmen on the stretcher, unconscious. And I just put my hand on her leg, and I felt literally a bolt of lightning go through the crown of my head, out my hand, and she literally rippled on the gurney. And I was like, oh, she's going to be fine. It wasn't exactly like I was healing her. It was more like I was tuning into a timeline for her where she was going to be fine. And I was like, oh, she's going to be fine. And I immediately calmed down. I knew she was going to be fine. And that same nurse grabbed me from my arm, said, you can't be in here. And when he did, I had like a flash of him beating his significant other, girlfriend, wife, whoever, the night before, which totally, like, I saw her like screaming and him hitting her, and I was like, like, this was overwhelming for me. So I ran to the bathroom, and I just kind of like got in the corner because I think I was in shock, I was shaking, and I was overwhelmed by all of these like sensory input that was happening, lights and people and all their experiences, and people stealing my purse and accusing me of manslaughter, and it was just horrifying. And then this nice nurse came in, and she was like really sweet. She was like, we need to get some x-rays, and we really just want to take care of you. You're going to be okay. And so she just kind of calmed me down. I said, I'll come out as long as that you keep the male nurse away from me, which she said, yeah, he will. So here's the interesting part. So they went and they took x-rays of my neck. And on the first x-ray, they came back and they said, your neck is broken. Like, you have a broken neck. And I'm like, oh, no. I was like, no, that wasn't in my timeline. I saw my timeline. I'm coming back to write a book and tell the world that love is all that matters, which, by the way, that book is just of recent been completed. It's now on Amazon. It's called Love Letters to Your Soul. And I was like, no, you need to take that x-ray again. So they took another x-ray, and then they took a third and a fourth. So on the first, it was broken. Second through fourth, there was no break, and they couldn't explain it. They were like literally showing me the x-rays, like, here's the break. No. But what I did is I put my hand on my neck, and I was like, no. And then that same kind of like bolt of lightning or energy came through my hand, and my hand was just literally stuck to my neck. And second, third, and fourth x-ray, no break. So they made me sign away all my rights. Basically, we're not responsible if your neck is broken, which will let you go, because they didn't want to discharge me. But so anyway, I signed away, and it's a bigger story, a longer story, but I'd like to get to, I made it back to my children, back to Dallas, and I remember just locking myself in a room, because again, there was all this sensory overload. Like, I was seeing auras. I didn't even know what an aura was, but I was seeing undulating light of different shades and colors around people. I couldn't touch anyone without immediately knowing their deepest fear and sorrow and joy. And it was really, one of the things that's really surprising to me, at least then, was that there's so much fear in people and so much hiding. Everybody feeling so unworthy and posturing, and the truth is how beautiful and radiant they are. Like, if they only knew, if they could only see themselves. But I didn't have the context for all of this, and I really didn't want to be a psychic. I was like not part of my timeline. I was like, no, I don't want to, it's a big responsibility. And also I was shown, these timelines, nothing's set. And I think this is important for your listeners to understand that, even in the out-of-body state, I was given the choice. We are here with free will. I could have just exited the planet, and it would have been fine. I remember thinking, if I exit the planet, that particular timeline, I was shown that my children would be fine without me, which, by the way, was shocking. But for those of you that, like, if leaving a child behind, I think so many times is like somebody can't understand. But what I was shown is that if I left them behind, that their life would turn out just fine, that there was a timeline where I was gone and they would find their way, and it'd be different challenges, but it would be a part of their soul journey. So it was all intricately connected, but not preset. And so, I was shown certain timelines and given the choice. And so even in this life that we have here, like, our choices really, really matter, and they shift universes. Like, if we only understood how powerful we are, the whole world would change. One person changing just a little bit, changes everything. And so I was just kind of in this. For 2 weeks, I kind of just hung out in my bedroom with the blinds like closed, because I was like, I don't know what's going on, and it was scary. And my cousin I was really deeply concerned about my cousin, who had 90% brain damage. The prognosis was not good. She would never have a normal life again. She would never speak again, or walk again, or talk again. So finally, I decided to go and visit Carmen. And I remember when I came in, like her mother and everyone was looking at me like I was the bad guy, because I had invited her on this trip and this was their daughter. And they were very upset with me because, I mean, even though I wasn't driving, I had invited her on this trip, and it was my friend who was driving and her daughter. So they were not happy to see me. But I remember walking in and seeing Carmen, and as I said, I started this by saying she was this beautiful woman, I mean, looks much like you. And that was not the woman that I saw there, because she had broken every bone in her face, and her eye caps, and even sockets of her eyes, and she had little rubber bands in all her teeth, and she was unconscious, and she was just like in this, not in. So, but then I had this same presence, and I was like, kind of reassured, like, Chrystal, this is your cousin Carmen, and you love her, like, regardless of the spirit, like the physical being, like I was shown like the true spirit. So I walked over to her, and this was in front of her doctors and nurses and her mother, and I put my hand on her, and when I did, she opened her eyes. She came out of a coma, and it shocked everyone, not necessarily me, but everybody in the room. And then not only did she open her eyes, she insisted on getting out of bed, and she walked over to me, and she had her little IV, and she said, Chrystal, I'm in the light. I'm gleaming. I've never been so radiant. I'm a star. And that relates back to my childhood experience when I was shown the serene night filled with lights and told that that's what we are. And so remember, if you go back in time, when I had asked God to show me, reaffirm to me that he was real before I died, not after. This is one more like really poignant way of God saying, yeah, you want some affirmation? Here you go. And so Carmen went back into bed and went back into coma, like immediately. And every time that I would come and see her, she would open her eyes and come out of coma, and it was started to freak out her parents, literally. Like one of the times I came in, she affirmed what I was told in the out-of-body space. She sat up in bed and she said, Chrystal, you're going to write a book, and you're going to tell the world that love is all that matters. And you're going to put sound and light is the future of medicine. And then she went back to sleep, and I was like, whoa. But after that particular time, her mother said, I'm not sure what you're doing to my daughter, but you're not welcome here anymore. And so they I think they thought I was doing some kind of poltergeist or something. It was just scary to them. In her defense, she was a very Catholic woman and traditional, and this was just really scary to her. But, I had so many experiences with Carmen. Like one time before I was banned, one time I went to see her, and she told me that she had 3 beings of light, which I would call orbs around her, or guardians in like a Catholic terminology. And that these 3 beings had been with her for all of time and space. And we all have these guardians, guides, companions and I always say this in this ideal, like when you think about your guides or your companions, if you think about someone you love really deeply in this life, whether it's a parent, a mate, a friend, even an animal, how much you love them, a child, like the love that you feel, that overwhelming love. And it's like you've only known them, let's say a maximum of 20, 30, 40 years, maybe 80, maybe 60. But whatever it is, it's a very small amount of time in comparison to eternity, or comparison to 5,000 years or 100 years, or, from the beginning of time that you've known your spiritual companions who love you, the very essence of you, within all the different expressions of you and all the many lifetimes that you've had as male, female, and everything else. So they completely love you and embrace you and care for you, and it's this love that can't even be spoken of in human terms or measured by any kind of measure here, because it's so all-encompassing. And each one of us has these beings of light that are our soul companions, our guides, our teachers and mentors. But I remember her in particular telling me that she had 3, which is really interesting because my mother, who was a Christian, towards the end of her life, she also had a very serious ailment where her gallbladder burst, and she's a very traditional woman. So she went from being alcoholic to when I left home. By the way, when I left home, it broke my mom's heart because she really loved her children. She just couldn't manage her own emotions, which is why she turned to alcohol. But because it was the dark night of the soul for her that her child had run away from home, she stopped drinking and she pendulumed over into Christianity, which was extreme. You know, she was really extreme Christian. But it was better for her in a sense than drinking. But she also had this experience when her gallbladder burst of having 3 beings of light that were around her and told her that she was going to be okay, and that they had been with her from the beginning of time, and they would be with her for all of time. And it's interesting because she told us, the 3 of us, the 3 siblings, she told us about this experience, but promptly afterward, after she came, you know, was getting well, she said, oh, that was just a dream, that wasn't real. But from my perspective, I know it was real because I've been in the spaces enough where I know, and I've had enough experiences. In fact, when I meditate at night, I often will film my meditation, and there's always orbs of light around me, many, many orbs of light that follow geometric path. And I don't really talk about it much because I think it's kind of scary for people, but really it's not, there's a lot more going on here than people realize. But one thing I do want to say about your spiritual guides is that they're here to help you, but they can't help you. And especially those of you who are in the dark night of the soul, you have to ask for help because of your spiritual guides, of your angels, whatever terminology you want to use, Jesus or Buddha or Krishna or whatever it is that feels true for you, you have to ask for help because in a free will paradigm, nothing can come to us unless we open that door. In other words, we're free to choose our lives. But the minute you ask for help, like I need help, which by the way, I do daily. I'm like, I cannot do this alone. Life is extremely challenging. You know, we have sorrow, we have loss, we have disappointment. You know, another thing I think that's interesting is that many people think that because you've had a spiritual experience such as mine, an out-of-body experience, or you know, a spiritual transformative experience, however it may show up for you, or a near-death experience for that matter, that now life is going to be easy. And that's not necessarily true. Like you have the same challenges and perhaps a little bit more because you're not running to the typical coping mechanisms of other people. You sort of learn to sit with your own discomfort. And because this life is meant to be a school, a playground, a place of growth, we call forth the experiences, the challenges, and the joys that would be part of our transformation. In other words, make us a more radiant version of ourselves. There's not a moment here on planet Earth that is wasted. Like every blossoming flower, every wilting weed is meant to either, you know, be a point of our empowerment, or at least point us toward a different path, a more radiant path, which is why we're here. And also to experience the experience of experience. For many, they ask, what's the whole meaning of life? Well, the meaning of life, at least from my perspective and what I've experienced and what I've been shown, is that we're here just to be ourselves and to know ourselves more fully through the experience of being the particular embodiment that we are currently, and in the circumstances with the predispositions and that we're born into with our family and our culture, our economics, our IQ, our bodies, and our illnesses and our weaknesses and our strengths and all of that together, so that we can know ourselves and know others, and actually even know the divine more intimately through our experience. So the way I think about it is that if God were, and is for me, a radiance, pure love, light, and that which is most beautiful is always coming into existence. And so if each one of us, as an expression of the divine, burst into particles of light out into the universe for the experience of the experience, and that each one of us gather energy and gather information and bring it back to the light as we evolve until we finally merge back into source, bringing with us the unique and never to be replicated experiences of our own individuality from this more expansive state where we are actually, blocked from the truth of our oneness, so that we can experience ourselves in individuation and know ourselves in oneness more fully, which is a long way of saying that we are all part of the divine and doing our individual part to know ourselves in darkness so that we can understand the light. I know many people say, but planet Earth is such a hard place. How could there be a loving creator? And what I was shown was that if you think of yourself as a light and God as, think about a baseball field, and there's this huge floodlights that just completely make the baseball field look like it's daytime. It's so bright. And you're like a little flashlight. That's what you are. And so you exist far away from the floodlight, as far away as possible where you can shine. But as you grow in radiance, you can come closer and closer to that light and still shine until finally you merge back into the light. And you realize that you were never separate from it anyway, because all there is light. But you come back with this experience. And again, my belief is that everything is divinely orchestrated for the good of the soul and the well-being of all, and also for the benefit of the divine. Like it's all works magically together. And this life, this 89 years, 100 years that we have here, is just a dot, not even less than a dot. It's a speck in eternity. And eternity is unfathomable. And we are eternal souls. And we have this moment in time. But this moment in time is really like flickering lights on the screen of a movie. So when you have a movie screen, and you can have all different movies. You can have a comedy, you can have a love story, a murder scene. You could have all this stuff on this. But the minute the light comes back on, the movie screen, which is your soul as the metaphor, is unaffected by all the flickering lights. The movie screen is always pure, it's always white, but it's enhanced by the experience of the experience. And we carry that in our DNA, in our cellular structure, in our cosmic energy back to the Akashic records, which is the records of all time and space and all experiences. And so, like our soul, we get to have these experiences. And I think the most important message that I'd like to share with your viewers and with anyone who hears this is that love is all that matters. Like, all the other stuff is just minor details, but at the end of your life, like, what is going to matter is where I talked about helping this woman on a bench that I never met again, by the way, never saw again. But I was shown in this out-of-body experience how I don't think I added on this woman. She not only did not take her life, but she ended up working, and I was shown her in complete existence. Like, she ended up working in a homeless shelter and helping others that didn't have food, and impacting the world in ways that you can't even imagine, which rippled out in ways that we can't even imagine. Like, it is like incredible how one act of kindness affected so many lives. And so we get to have this experience, this really short temporal experience. I always think, like, I just turned 63, which is crazy, because like yesterday I was 10 years old, like, where did and then tomorrow I'll be 107, and then I'll be gone. And that's how quick our lives are. And so the importance of every moment, not to waste our lives. And when I say that, like, people think that I'm not trying to say be happy, 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 because as I mentioned, I think part of life is to find the joy even in sorrow, the joy of experience, the joy of being able to feel so profoundly, and to take the experiences that make you a better person, even if they are challenging. And again, when we talk about the loving universe, everything is happening for us, nothing happening to us. Like, everything is divinely purposed. I had this poignant moment. I've always loved these little bitty yellow flowers you see in the grass. You know what I'm talking about? Like, these little tiny ones. But one day I was walking and I saw one of these little yellow flowers, and it was on the sidewalk, in between the sidewalk, and it was like pushing up through the cracks. And I just like stunned, like I stopped, and I was like, life just wants to live. Through this little crack, this little bitty flower is bursting through, reaching for the light, and really bringing joy to my life. Like this, you're walking, and so many times, we don't even see it, but I just stopped, and I was like stunned by this. And I'm still carrying this little bitty flower with me, right? it found a way to live. I mean, it's long gone, but it affected me because I feel like this is what we are, and what we have the opportunity to do in our own individuated ways is just to be a little kinder and to let our light shine and recognize the impermanence of this existence and make it a meaningful one and not be a victim, because victimism doesn't serve anyone. It's just an energy. I mean, although there's no judgment on it, it's not going to serve your soul at all. And the minute that you take your power back, like the guy in the concentration camp, then you can truly change the world. And this man, he's also gone, but his words have lived on. His experience, they affected me, they affected my listeners, they've affected your listeners, because he went through this horror. Like, I can't even imagine the horror of being in a concentration camp, and yet still chose to see the stars. And stars have been so spectacular for me, because in my first near-death experience I was shown that's what we are, and then my second near-death experience, Carmen's telling me that she's a star, and then this man, that his poignant quote about you can look at the mud or see the stars, it's all available. So I think it's a poignant metaphor in my life, is that we can look up and see the stars at any time that we choose to. And it doesn't mean that life will be easy, because concentration camps are real. Bad stuff happens. People get hurt. There is horror. There is tragedy. There is joy. There is elation. There is the full spectrum of life. It's not one-dimensional at all. And, if you're lucky, your heart will be broken 1,000 times every day, so that you can learn to love more profoundly. So that's my story, my gift. I share a lot more of the details of more of the teachings in my book, Love Letters to Your Soul, of how to live a more joyful and meaningful life. I've also just started my own podcast, which is called And Then More Love, which I'm doing on a weekly basis now. So good, exciting things happening. It's only taken me 30 years to be ready to do this, because it was such a noble mission to tell the world that love is all that matters. And it's something that I felt I had to embody before I could actually share this message. And it's really my joy to do this. So thank you for offering this platform and allowing me to share my story.
Oh, absolutely. And it's been so wonderful to be able to hear not just your story, but your insights. And I know that I will have to go back over this and watch it a couple of times to be able to really get everything out of it, because I think, some bits of what you've said that are still resonating in my ears, like choosing not to be a victim, feeling unlovable, unworthy, and then having this experience of touching people and seeing their fears and knowing, everything about them, and understanding that everybody has a lot of fears and a lot of shame, and we all sort of carry it with them. And having to step up into being worthy, being lovable, and rising up to the person that would be able to fulfill this mission. Understanding that we are all one and that we're connected, and it's just an illusion that we're so separated. I think these messages that you've put into this beautiful story for us today is something that we can really choose to understand and to relate back to our lives, to our challenges. And I think we need to take the space to do that. It's very difficult to hear it once and then your life is just changed. But I think if there's anything that resonated with you guys in this conversation today, meditate on it, think about it, and think about what it means to you. You have Chrystal's perspective, but definitely think of how you can embody that moving forward. So I definitely want to thank you, Chrystal. I know that it's a very emotional story, and I always know that it's not easy to open up the floodgates of emotion, as I call it. But thank you for being so raw and vulnerable with us. And because you've mentioned your teaching, you've mentioned your book, where can we find you for anybody that wants to connect with you, and where can we find your book?
So I have a website. It's crystalraysoul.com. And then also I'm on Amazon, Love Letters to Your Soul on Amazon. You can find me there. But if you want to reach out to me, I'm always happy to connect. And I do enjoy speaking, so I'm also open to some speaking invitations. So you can find me at crystalraysoul.com.